Well, it's a great pleasure to welcome you to this meeting of hermeneutics in real life, in which we will discuss a little bit of how digital humanities intersect with hermeneutics and other topics related to our pedagogical environments. As with almost every topic in our contemporary society, many discussions about digital humanities tend to be very polarized. From a practical point of view, some think the digital humanities are the salvation for the decline of interest in the humanities. In contrast, others believe that it's a Trojan horse that will destroy the humanities by corrupting them from within. From an epistemological point of view, some believe that the digital and humanities methods are mutually exclusive, while others see no difficulty at all in reconciling qualitative and quantitative methods in the humanities. As usual, a deeper discussion of these polarities will likely transform these extreme positions into a much more complex and fruitful gradient for understanding what circumstances, what caveats, what topics, what methods specific to the interdisciplinarity of digital humanities can be beneficial pedagogically, pragmatically, and epistemologically. Today's panelists have been thinking about these issues in depth, and we are very grateful that they took time out of their weekends to share their perspectives with us. To get our discussion going, I will ask each panelist to comment on this topic for a few minutes, and it's completely open and not much structure. They will take from 5 to 10 minutes with these initial comments. Then in a second moment, I will ask all panelists to react, share their thoughts and reactions to their colleagues' initial presentations. And then in the third moment, we invite all participants to share their questions and comments. But as usual, you are more than welcome to type your questions in the chat box at any time, and we will try our best to address them in the final part of our conversation today. Okay, so I will invite each panelist to do their introductions and initial comments, and I will follow the order on the website. That is basically the order ordered by their last names. And so we start with Laura Chapeau. She's a Newcomb postdoctoral fellow in the departments of German Studies and Digital Humanities at Dartmouth College. Laura's research brings together comparative literature, modern languages, cultural history, and computational text analysis to study the ways in which different representational practices shape how we perceive, interpret, and act in the world. Laura, thank you very much for coming to our meeting today and to take some time out of your weekend. And welcome to Hermeneutics in Real Life.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Fernando. And thank you for inviting me and for the introduction. So yeah, as Fernando said, I work at the intersections between broadly comparative literature and the digital humanities. And more specifically, I specialize in the phenomenon of decadence in the late 19th century, in late 19th century literature and culture, particularly in Germany and Sweden. And I use a combination of computational text analysis and literary methods to try and understand and analyze this phenomenon of decadence. So my background is very much in literary studies. And the way I kind of came in contact with digital humanities was somewhat by chance, actually. It was during my PhD, and it was at a time where the digital humanities were not really a thing yet, at least at my university and definitely in the department that I was working in. And I went to a talk one day, and the speaker, who was a translator, was talking about how she used computational text analysis in her work as translator. So the way I first encountered computational text analysis was as something kind of part of the possible practices that we had of working with languages. It was part of the toolkit that, you know, researchers had to work with languages. So I didn't encounter it, at least initially, through this frame of tension and contradiction that, you know, the title of this roundtable suggests, and that Fernando alluded to in his introduction. But this idea of contradiction is an important aspect of these, you know, discussions that are gaining a lot of importance at the moment about how we understand and negotiate the relations between the humanities and computation. So what I thought I'd do is that I'd talk a little bit about how this tension and contradiction between computation and the humanities has played out for me in my experiences as a teacher in the classroom, and a little bit in my experience in my research and in relation to literary studies more generally. So last year, I taught a course at Dartmouth called Computational Comparative Literature. And in this course, I wanted to kind of experiment with the idea about, what would be a comparative literature approach to computation? How would we teach computational text analysis from a comparative literature perspective? So the course kind of introduces students to computational text analysis methods, emphasizing you know, the kind of considerations we need to take into account if you're working with multiple languages and analyzing different kinds of text and different types of language. And alongside learning computational text analysis method, we also tried to think critically about digital culture globally. So to give an example, if you want to analyze text computationally, you need text to be digitized and you need text to be machine readable. So the students would learn about optical character recognition, how to OCR text, and how to build a digital corpus. But we did that alongside thinking about the politics of digitization, how digitization is maybe shaped by national agendas and by ideologies and histories of record building, and as well as, you know, technical capabilities. And so I learned a lot from this course, and I learned a lot from the students in the classroom. And it was an interesting class because roughly half of the students were computer science students and the other half were humanities-based students. And so one of the things I think I learned from this class was that students aren't just interested in learning about computational methods, but they're also interested in cultural critical approaches to digital culture. So students really value different kinds of literacies for understanding and engaging with computation and digital culture. And another thing that was interesting for me was to see how the different disciplinary backgrounds of the students kind of brought to light some of the implicit disciplinary norms and behaviors and practices of doing interpretations that the students had already started to kind of internalize. And so I remember, for example, one specific interaction between two students, one humanities one and one computer science student. And we were doing group work and analyzing Kafka's short story, and the humanities student was getting very excited. He was analyzing all these interactions between food and family that he was reading in the short story. And his partner was like, oh, but how are you analyzing this? What method are you using to discover all this? And the student said, well, I ran a topic model, and you see in this topic, there's words for both food and family. And I'm reading that in context of the text. And the partner kind of seemed kind of surprised, maybe not very convinced about this kind of interpretive leap from results to, you know, to the interpretation. So that was a memorable moment. And so the distinction was that the humanities students seemed to use the methods as springboards for interpretation. Well, the focus was on the cultural phenomenon they were analyzing, and the methods were kind of a tool to help them get a better understanding of that. And there was perhaps not so much focus on the methods themselves, whereas computer science students were much clearer about the methodological process and focused a lot more on how to perform certain tasks, but often kind of didn't go very far with the, there was less discussion of the results and just what do you do with the results? What do they mean? How do you interpret them? So now I'm going to talk a little bit about this relationship between literature and computation in context of my research and literary studies more generally. And I just wanted to briefly mention kind of two recurring questions in the field of literary studies about this contradiction between the humanities and the digital. And one of the questions is, are humanists really qualified to be using and critiquing computational methods? Do humanists have the literacy and the training required to use computational methods? And another question is, do computational methods really add to interpretation in any meaningful way? Are these methods really helping us to interpret the things that, as literary and cultural critics, that we're interested in analyzing? And if I have time, just one quick comment on this second question about do they add to humanistic interpretation? I've found in my research that the computational methods do help me analyze dimensions of language and meanings that I might not have paid attention to before. But I also find that there's kind of a mutual, and this kind of surprised me, that there's a mutual effect that learning about and using computational methods also made me think about computation in new ways and helped me see computation as a kind of cultural and textual practice that I hadn't thought about before, you know, incorporating them into my literary research. So yeah, thanks. Thank you for listening to my initial comments, and I look forward to hearing from everyone else.
That was great, Laura. Thank you so much. And then our next panelist is James Dobson. He's an assistant professor in the Department of English and Creative Writing at Dartmouth. He's a literary and cultural critic who specializes in intellectual history and US autobiography writing in the 19th and 20th centuries. James wrote a very interesting book for our discussion. The title is Critical Digital Humanities, The Search for a Methodology. It was published by the University of Illinois Press in 2009. And in that book, he establishes a new theoretical paradigm through an account of new computer-aided techniques that are increasingly used in the humanities. So, James, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Fernando, for the invitation to participate in this very exciting conversation. I prepared a bit of a formal position statement, so I'll read this. Yeah. For me, at least, our framing question, are the digital humanities an oxymoron, opens up an important line of inquiry into the epistemological status of objects and methods in the humanities. It also provides me with an opportunity to reflect on my own teaching in this area, especially in a course that attracts its fair share of students who are primarily interested in the social sciences. The question also raises, or rather responds to, anxieties about the fate of the humanities in the university, and decades now of interest shifting away from the humanities and towards STEM fields, especially computer and data science. It would seem that for the accusation that the humanities, that the digital humanities are not compatible with the humanities to have any force, the line of distinction separating the humanities from other disciplinary modes would need to be drawn in terms of methods. This is clear because so much digital humanities work has been directed towards typical humanities objects. And strangely, considering the promises of large-scale analysis, those objects have been deeply canonical works. So the digital and digital humanities then would name different modes of addressing objects that are distinct from those found in the humanities. This perspective is not entirely wrong, and there are certainly many non-humanistic ways of addressing objects, whether these are art or text objects or maps or numerical data. DH's heavily deployed concepts of falsifiability, significance, sampling, norms, and even averages have been imported from the natural and social sciences, from statistics and other disciplines, and they are frequently in tension with humanistic values and ways of reading. I had been rather compelled by John Guillory's 2016 account of the humanities via Erwin Panofsky as defined by its objects. For Guillory, what he terms documents and monuments. Guillory even references the digital humanities in a footnote in which he claims that methods are not sufficient to define the humanities. But computation has introduced recursion into the object method schema. The separation of objects from methods becomes increasingly hard to justify as methods produce objects, typically numerical models, that are then interpreted by others. And yet I will claim that both the methods and objects of the digital humanities, when used with critical reflexivity, are not necessarily incompatible with the humanities. Due to time constraints, I'll only be able to address a subsection, the broad fields of the digital humanities, and will narrowly focus on the application of computation to texts. But I can say from my recent work on computer vision that similar arguments can be applied to the analysis of visual culture. In examining the use of computation text analysis, which, depending on the object of analysis, has been called computational literary studies or cultural analytics, I'm interested in two main concepts. First, the algorithmic transformation of text and numerical data, and second, the derivation of new data objects produced as a result of these transformations. The originary, or source objects within this subfield are text, and scholarly arguments are made on behalf of these texts. Within my narrow area of concern for today, humanities questions can be attached to both method and objects. When applied to methods, computational methods are subject to inquiry, even if the questions that guide the use of those methods and the objects of our analysis are not humanistic in nature. It's because methods are tools, as my co-panelist Conor van Es has convincingly argued. Tool criticism enables us to understand the transformations and to interpret the derived data objects. Even if one was not willing to go as far as my other co-panelist, Luca Passati, and grant the status of writing to digital tools, which is to say software, we can still read and interpret the operation, the histories, and the politics of our tools. There are many, many accounts of humanistic readings of technology, from those asking, as my colleague Rupika Rassam does, where's the human in digital humanities, and finding occluded subjectivities, encoded biases, pedagogical effects and affordances, and the residues of ideologies. Data objects, which is to say the method-produced interpretive objects, and in this particular context of digital literary studies, the numerical models like vector space representations are inscripted representations of modeled objects. I'd also want to claim that these models need to be interpreted alongside the texts or collections of texts, and that without the language resources that these models index, such models cannot be properly understood. Annabel Jane Wharton's Defining Models, the opening chapter of a recently published edited collection titled Model Work, provides a compelling definition of a model that I'd like to cite here. It's a longer quote. A model is an autonomous agent that has a referent, material, ideal, conceptual, or imaginary, to which it semiotically averts, iconically, indexically, symbolically, but from which it differs in significant ways, in complexity, scale, material, function, ontology, and the like. A model assumes its interpreter's familiarity with its particular hermeneutic conventions. It can be strong or weak, good or bad, honest or dishonest. No model can ever illicitly make truth claims. Nevertheless, good models are epistemic operators that work toward a fuller understanding of the world. All models are entangled in discourse. They have history and they act politically. Wharton's model qualities gesture to important interpretive problems of great humanistic interest. A digital humanities concerned with the creation and interpretation of models defined in these terms remains firmly embedded within the humanities. This is because, as I have claimed, computational models are inscribed. If software is writing, it also writes. Transformations are transformations of something, and the product is inscribed with the traces of this transformation. Not all of these objects, however, can be read in the same way. As Wharton writes, there are multiple hermeneutic conventions involved in model creation, and one needs to be sure that they understand if a particular model has inscribed certain textual features, a discourse, or language as such. I'd like to close my initial comments by pointing to some troubling aspects of what might initially seem like a tangential, but is in fact a key topic, the interpretation of algorithmically generated text. An attempt to interpret these texts now makes clear the recursive nature of object and method in the digital humanities. The relatively recent rise of generative methods to produce new texts adds to the existing interpretive difficulties another layer of complexity. One cannot easily interpret the output from one of these models in relation to the originary text or author. These are more akin to neural or large language models in that they model language features in the discourse sampled as training data. The text outputs, however, should be interpreted in terms of the methods and the models used to generate the text, as well as the data sets and archives of text that provided training material for the model. It would also be important to interpret the prompts themselves that function as the queries, seeds, or parameters for these models. Once efforts move beyond novelty and imitation games, interpreting these texts will be challenging and will make clear the necessity of a computational hermeneutics. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. And we are starting to create this kaleidoscope that we wanted for this first part of our conversation. And Luca Posati, who is also with us, will help us putting additional pieces of this kaleidoscope. Luca is a researcher and lecturer at the University of Porto in Portugal. Is trained as a philosopher, and he has been lectured at the Institut Catholique de Paris, an associate researcher at the Fonds Ricoeur, and also the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales in Paris. His research focuses on philosophy of technology, and in particular on the social and ethical impacts of artificial intelligence. His approach combines philosophy, psychology, and actor network theory. Luca, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this invitation. Can I share some slides?
Yes, absolutely. You should be good to go.
Okay. Can you see my slides?
Perfectly.
So thank you so much for this invitation and for this opportunity to share my work and to have this discussion. So I wanted to introduce with my speech a kind of new perspective on digital humanities, because I see digital humanities more as a way to interpret and design technology. So for me, digital humanities is more a form of approach to the philosophy of technology. And today I would like to share with you my view and my perspective on a particular kind of digital humanities what I would call, quoting a book by Alberto Romele, digital hermeneutics. And I would like to talk about my approach to digital hermeneutics, digital humanities, and digital interpretations. I call this approach the algorithmic unconscious. That is a new approach to artificial intelligence, to AI, through the lens of psychoanalysis and psychology. First of all, I would like to frame a little bit the algorithmic unconscious hypothesis. What is the algorithmic unconscious? Well, the algorithmic unconscious hypothesis is a new way to interpret technology and the philosophy of technology and how can interpret technology. And it's an extension of digital hermeneutics. And let me just underline four main assumptions of this new emerging research field. First of all, technology are always entangled in social and cultural dynamics. They are embedded in and contribute to maintaining and reconfiguring cultural and social worldviews. Secondly, technology are fundamental mediations between humans and the world, and these mediations are symbolically mediated. Thirdly, the effectiveness of these machines, of AI systems, doesn't depend exclusively on their concrete capacities, the functions, but also on the imaginaries, the imaginations that humans have toward them, and that can be crystallized in cultural productions such as images, movies, narratives, texts. If we limit ourselves to considering only the technical aspects of a technology, we risk not understanding the social and ethical impact of the technology, and therefore its potential risks. What I'm interested in extending this research field is understanding how the concept of unconscious changes in digital contexts, how the concept of unconscious changes through AI systems, machine learning and deep learning systems. So the problem of the algorithmic unconscious is twofold. On the one hand, how AI systems can transform, shape, condition, and influence the human unconscious. On the other hand, how the human unconscious can transform, shapes, condition, and influence AI systems. And of course, by human unconscious, I mean the set of our imaginations, rooted in emotions, drive, impulses, associations. So it's a new approach to AI, exploring the unconscious roots of our relation to these machines. Developing the algorithmic unconscious hypothesis means formulating some key questions. Can we explore the unconscious imaginary at shape and it's shaped by artificial intelligence? How does human identity change through artificial intelligence? Do AI and digital technology give rise to new form of unconscious? So exploring the algorithmic unconscious hypothesis means, first of all, understanding how designers, engineers, customers, users unconsciously project their imaginations on AI. Understanding how AIs reproduce and transform these projections. How these projections influence the behavior of AIs and their history. And also how we can analyze these projections in order to improve our control, our knowledge of these systems. This is what I tried to do, for example, in one of my last papers, understanding the relation, for example, in this paper, between personal trauma and AI chatbots. How AI chatbots can transform the experience of personal trauma. This is very interesting because I analyzed, for example, the narratives about these chatbots, how these chatbots convey new narratives about technology, about AI, and how the narratives produced by the designers of this technology can influence the behavior and the development of this chatbot, of these technological systems. This is not just a theoretical problem. The question is, what do we want from these machines? And let me quote here one of the most important scholars in AI today, Stuart Russell, author of a very interesting book, Human Compatible. Well, Russell claims if we build machines to optimize objectives, the objectives we put into the machines have to match what we want. But we don't know how to define human objectives completely and correctly. This is, from my point of view, the problem of digital humanities and digital hermeneutics, as digital hermeneutics. Human beings put their goal into the machine. But this is exactly the problem. Humans want the machine to do what we want, but we don't know how to define human objectives completely and correctly. And we often act in ways that contradict our own preferences. Humanity is not a single rational entity, but, and I'm quoting Russell again, humanity is composed of nasty and envy-driven, irrational, inconsistent, unstable, computationally limited, complex, evolving, heterogeneous entities, loads and loads of them. How can we communicate our needs, values, and preferences to AI systems? So what we need is a broader approach to human-machine relations, new models to interpret human-machine relations and to design new human-machine relations. Maybe you notice this distinction, System 1, System 2. It's from a very famous book, Thinking Fast and Slow, by Daniel Kahneman. Well, Kahneman distinguishes two systems, two main ways in which human mind works. System 1, unconscious, based on affections, emotions, and then System 2, conscious, it's the place of the attention, memory, the effort, the voluntary effort. And the problem, the human mind keeps together these two systems. The human mind is the result of the interaction of these two systems. The problem of the algorithmic unconscious hypothesis is to understand the relation between System 1, System 2, and a new system, System 3, technology. Technology which is able, a form of technology which is able to define and redefine the relations between System 1 and System 2. And this matters because lots of cognitive biases arise from the relations between AI and System 1 and System 2. So this is, for example, a very concrete problem, the problem of the algorithmic biases. Today, it's a big problem in managing artificial intelligence systems, the biases, the bad systematic tendencies that can spread discrimination, marginalization, epistemic injustice, but also fake news, hate speeches, etc. That can have a huge impact on decision-making processes also in daily life, in personal life, but also in the governmental organizations. Well, algorithmic biases are a new form of biases that needs a new form of interpretations, a new form of analysis. So in my work as a researcher, I proposed a new model in order to understand not just the algorithmic biases, but the algorithmic unconscious and the algorithmic biases as a manifestation of the algorithmic unconscious. As you can see, it's a model composed by many different layers. It's a model to interpret the relations between the human unconscious and the algorithmic systems, such as, of course, AI systems, but we can also extend this to software and hardware, etc. And as you can see, Now, I will just summarize the model. As you can see, the root of the model is a set of projective identification. This is a psychoanalytical term. Projective identifications are the first forms of imaginary identifications that are at the root, of the human unconscious, of the human need to the human need for identification. Then normativities, habitus, social habitus, that are incorporated into algorithmic systems. There is a huge literature about these normativities. Scholars distinguish three forms of normativities embedded in algorithms: technical, social, and behavioral. Then even the noise and the distinction between noise and information can be read as a form of normativity embedded in algorithmic systems. And then the part of executions, latent executions, and actual executions, and then the relationship with the environment. So the algorithmic unconscious is a kind of stratigraphy composed by several interactive levels. It's a kind of new hermeneutical model in order to understand AI behavior, and AI biases. Thank you very much for your attention.
Oh, thank you, Luca. That was great and a very interesting, different angle to our conversation. So instead of starting from how the digital is kind of helping the humanities, you kind of went all the way around, which is a great shift that creates another tension for our discussion coming up. And then I wanted to invite Alberto Ronelli. He's an assistant professor of digital communication at ICN, the Institute of Communication and Media at University Paris 3 Sorbonne Nouvelle. He's also a part-time researcher at the ISR, the Center for Religious Studies, Bruno Kessler Foundation in Trento, Italy. Alberto has been a research associate at the International Center for Ethics and Sciences and Humanities, the University of Tübingen in Germany, and associate professor of philosophy of technology at the Catholic University of Lille. Alberto research focuses on philosophy of technology, digital hermeneutics, and imaginaries of AI. He's the author of Digital Hermeneutics, among other works. Particularly interesting for our conversation today, he's the author of Digital Hermeneutics, Philosophical Investigations in New Media and Technologies, that was published by Routledge in 2020. Alberto, thank you very much for being with us.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Fernando, for the invitation. And for once, let me say that I'm happy that I'm not the last one to speak. Usually in alphabetical order, I'm always the last one, and this time Karin will talk after me, so I'm really happy about that. Let me start. So where am I now with my reflection on this topic, digital hermeneutics, which is, well, I come from philosophy and now I'm much more into digital communication. But right now I'm working a lot on what I call the imaginaries of AI. And in particular, I'm very much interested in the way artificial intelligence is visually represented into stock images. So the images you can buy on the stock repositories of Getty Images, Shutterstock, and so forth and so on. So why am I talking about this? For two reasons. First of all, because it's like if right now I'm dealing with digital hermeneutics, and I understand digital hermeneutics as a sort of cultural hermeneutics. So I'm very much interested into the way the cultural and social representations of artificial intelligence shape our perception of artificial intelligence, but also have an effect on the very development at the level of technological innovation on artificial intelligence. So that's the first aspect. And the second aspect is that in my personal research, I'm trying to bring together quantitative and qualitative methods. methods. So that's probably the second reason why here, I think my research is connected with the topic of our meeting today, so digital humanities. So, but now let me go. So that's just to give you the context of where my researches are now. But let's go back to my philosophical background, and I would like to share with you why I started to deal with what I started to call, and I was not, of course, the first one to talk about digital hermeneutics. And I got somehow involved into the debate about digital humanities and into the question if digital humanities is an oxymoron or not, because this was the question you asked us. So, and the answer to this question is obviously no. It's not an oxymoron, and otherwise we would not be here, most probably. And why is that? Well, and that's why I would like to mobilize my philosophical roots and my hermeneutical roots. And these are roots that I share with you, Fernando, and with many others here today. So, and I would like to refer to Hans-Georg Gadamer, the German philosopher, who's of course one of the major representatives of the field of philosophical hermeneutics. So in 1960, Gadamer published this major work titled Wahrheit und Methode, through truth and method. Well, it's a very complex work divided into three parts, one devoted to art, the other one to history, and the other one to language. And well, despite the huge diversity between these three topics and between the different topics into the book, I think Gadamer's idea is pretty simple. It's simply and is pretty clear. Hermeneutics, that is the activity of interpretation, is something unique. Actually, his idea is very simple. Interpretation is not really an activity, is rather an event. And strictly speaking, well, actually, Gadamer say at the beginning of Truth and Method, an hermeneutic event cannot happen twice. An hermeneutic event happens just once. An hermeneutic event, so a successful interpretation, is something like a revelation, so that human interpretation is a sort of long spiritual exercise of preparation to this event that comes always from elsewhere. The truth of the work of art, the truth of history and tradition, the truth of language, and so forth and so on. So this idea of interpretation, I mean, it's well, there is this hermeneutical event, and this hermeneutical event is something unique. Well, of course, I couldn't disagree more with that. I couldn't disagree more with this idea that interpretation is a sort of event. Gadamer is not speaking of truth and method, but rather of truth or method. On the one hand, there is the immediate truth of revelation, the kind of truth he believes one can find via the humanities. And on the other, there is the method, the one of the hard sciences. Okay, and well, this reflection, observation about this truth and method, or truth or method thing doesn't come from me, but from another philosopher, you, Fernando, and some others know pretty well, who's Paul Ricoeur. And Paul Ricoeur, the French philosopher, who in several occasions and several works, such as The Conflict of Interpretation and From Text to Action, suggests a different kind of path. And this path would consist not in dividing, but rather in combining truth and method. And hence, one could say, soft and hard sciences. One of his favorite mottos was, we need to explain more in order to understand better. And in other terms, we need scientific explications if we want to access a philosophical understanding. We need methods if we want to have access to the truth. Well, Ricoeur, who was writing in the 60s and 70s, was thinking about structuralism and the methods, the structural methods. My idea is that today Paul Ricoeur would speak about digital humanities. I mean, he would not speak anymore about structuralism, he would speak about digital humanities, because digital humanities are actually the method and the tools, well, that's another kind of topic, methods and tools we should think about today. Well, actually, I think we should say that digital humanities are, or at least should be, the ultimate combination of these two instances, the one concerning the method and the one concerning the truth. So digital humanities as the combination of truth and method. And I say here should, of course, not are, because as you might have noticed, it happens to digital humanists to get too much fascinated by the method, of course, the tools and so forth and so on, and to forget about their ultimate scope, which is interpretation. And well, I have many other kind of consideration I would like to do here. I would like to reflect with you on where to put hermeneutics, so interpretation in digital humanities, at the level of data, at the level of software, at the level of text. I think the discussions of Luca and before the other speakers bring this topic forward. I mean, where should we put interpretation here? Another topic I would like to discuss about is on the limits of digital humanities whenever they lose the bigger picture. When for instance, they got simply lost in the text and don't think about the social and cultural environment in which the text is always embedded. But I would also like to talk with you about the potentialities of digital humanities. And I think its biggest one, the biggest potentiality of digital humanities, I believe it's the revelation of patterns behind what we used to think to be the work of the genius. I mean, one of the biggest and for me most interesting thing of digital humanities is the fact that we start to discover general patterns behind what we used to believe to be just the result of genius. And well, I think in this respect, digital humanities are anthropological. I mean, they're saying something about what human beings are. They're saying something about our unconscious in this respect, just to take Luca's words. But let me conclude with another very shortly with another specific matter, which is the fact that we traditionally thought of humanities as a matter for one single person, a researcher closed in her own library, working alone, and so forth and so on. Well, digital humanities are first and foremost a collective enterprise. So I think one of the biggest elements one of the biggest contributions of digital humanities to the humanities community is to concretely and practically transform the work of us as researchers into a sort of collective enterprise. So, and well, I have many other things to say, but I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alberto. It's I'm glad that you at this time you were not the last one to speak, at least for once, right? We have another panelist with a last name that comes after yours. I'm glad that we have Karen Van Ness with us. She is Associate Professor of Media and in Cultural Studies at the Utrecht University, and where she also leads the Humanities at Utrecht Data School, and is part of the steering committee of the focus area governing the digital society. Her research focuses on the impact of datafication and algorithmization on culture and society. Karen is author of the book The Future of Life by Polity Press in 2016. She's also co-editor of the volume The Datafied Society and a special issue Big Data Histories at the TMG Journal of Media History. She has published many other works in other outlets such as television and new media, Media, Culture and Society, MC Journal, and First Monday. Karen, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation also, Fernando. It's funny because in the Netherlands, I'm never last because they don't include the van. So I always get to be the E. So I'm Karen Van Ness, Associate Professor in Media and Culture Studies. I actually did a bachelor's in Communication Studies, which was a bachelor taught on the one hand by media studies scholars in the humanities and on the other side, community scholars. So we had this epistemological clash right from the beginning where my teachers would say, I wouldn't want to be found dead next to the work of my colleagues on the other side. So this tension was present throughout my entire bachelor career. But now I'm still in, well, one part of that department and actually contributing to that program, which has found a lot more harmony and also a lot more opportunities thanks to things like the digital humanities. And I want to focus today particularly on kind of the opportunities that datafication and algorithmization bring for the humanities to kind of intervene and make a valuable contribution. And we do that in Utrecht, or I do that with my team at the Utrecht Data School, which is an inter-faculty platform for what we call publicly engaged research. And we are funded entirely, well, we have, of course, an office funded by the university, but we also, our projects and most of our staff is funded by the third stream. So these external partners, we work on projects for them and provide services around ethics, primarily using various methods. It's a lot of kind of participatory action research as well. And as you can imagine, not only do we also dip our toes in computational methods, but we're being funded by the third stream. We're not always very popular with our humanities scholar who really found we have jumped the neoliberal bandwagon. But yeah, I find it a very rewarding environment to work primarily with a lot of young people on real problems. So it's not any longer the sole scholar sitting in their office reading books, but it's actually engaging with the field, connecting to our students through teaching. And I think here we see how relevant humanities scholarship is for the problems that we encounter in present day transformations of our digital society. So on the one hand, we focus on responsible AI and datafication and data practices. So investigating how datafication and algorithmization affect citizenship and democracy. Here we're actually engaged in developing practical and applicable solutions primarily for governance. So we work a lot with municipalities and also with the more national government around questions of data ethics. So we developed the tool Data Ethics Decision Aid, which invites ethical reflection on data projects. For instance, another project we worked on for the College for Human Rights was investigating the impact of search engines on employment websites, how they handle gendered language, for instance, and kind of the visibility of employment opportunities in that regard. So that's one part, responsible in AI and data practices. And on the other hand, we're looking at public debates and media. So investigating the dynamics of public debates online and in the media, using digital methods and data analysis, trying to understand the transformation of the public sphere and the consequences that this has for open society. So one of the more recent projects we worked on was on the role of expertise in social media debates. A project I was involved with had to do with data center imaginaries, kind of looking at the multifaceted and very situated nature. And I think one coming to this from also kind of our humanities perspective, I think a lot of what we bring to these types of projects is, on the one hand, the types of questions we pose. Of course, these are very different from our colleagues in other departments. The important role of close reading and the mixing of different methods, toggling between, on one hand, looking for those patterns, but primarily also using that to raise questions. And I think throughout the whole process of for instance, making such a retweet network, which you see here of the data center debate on Twitter in the Netherlands. It's amazing how much interpretive work lies beneath that image. Just the decision-making that goes into that, the understanding of the clusters, the understanding of what it is in the end, like the labeling that you do, the reading of the tweets to understand who you're dealing with and what you're dealing with. So I think that's always a very interesting aspect of this type of research as well. We also always recognize, right, the situated and partial nature of the data we are working with, right? For data to exist, they need to be imagined, of course. And so here you just see a quick overview of the kind of things we do. You can simply have a little temporal overview of tweeting activity, but what we found primarily interesting is the peaks we looked at were related to media publications about that data center, so critical newspaper articles or so forth. And then in the one I think my head is right in front of, you can't really see it well because we color coded it, but these are all the images that were circulated on Twitter within the different communities. Well, not sociological, the retweet communities we identified, to kind of help bring to light kind of how data centers are envisioned through not just what is being said, but also how they are being represented in these tweets. So I think that created a very interesting insight also, particularly to the situated nature of these imaginaries, because in the Netherlands we have this strong resistance from our farmers who actually now also have their own political party against the reduction of CO2 emissions. So that's a whole political discussion here. And they have been playing also a really big role in this whole data center discussion. And the Netherlands is one of those places where a lot of these multinational companies are wanting to situate their hyperscale data centers. And one of the last instances was Meta trying to situate that on farmland, which you can only imagine created a lot of discussion. So today's panel is about, is digital humanities an oxymoron? Well, together with my colleague Mirko Schaefer, in our book, The Datafied Society, our edited volume, we predict that the term digital humanities will sound increasingly pleonastic and will eventually disappear. It will lead not to the replacement of established methods in the humanities, but rather to an expansion in the curricula we study and the methods we use. Also in that same edition, our colleague Eve Masson was talking about that encounter between the hermeneutic and the empirical, and of course the accusation that humanities were pushing towards more reliable, accurate or scientific answers, raising critique about becoming an abstracted empiricism, or as Dobson notes, a renewed positives dream, linked to the positive ideal of establishing fact, right? And that we do no justice to our critical interpretive legacy in that regard. And this, of course, has to do also with the fact that we use these tools, these digital helpers, which come with a set of assumptions, models, and strategies. Knowledge is situated, capta not data. So that's just a line of thought there. So yeah, critical digital humanities. I guess you can question every aspect of the term critical digital humanities, which is kind of critiquing now these instrumental tendencies within the digital humanities. But I think it's also important that we take the digital as a research program in itself. So as David Berry also wrote, asking questions about the normative and political delegations into software code requires us to develop data-intensive ethics to challenge data practices, the ontological claims, and the consequences of data use. This would encourage us not to just to build things, but to take them apart and question question the values that are embedded in the software, making critical software to test our ideas and challenge our assumptions. This would call on us to turn our hermeneutic skills on the very software and algorithms that make up these systems. And as Dobson then extends, the digital humanities needs the hermeneutics of suspicion, especially as it applies to methodological choices and interpretations, and to respond to the previous speaker, throughout the entire process, right? So that's also part of where we came in with the Utrecht Data School. We actually came into existence because a student about 8 years ago came to my colleague Mirko and said, I really want to learn how to collect data from social media. I want to learn to be able to analyze that. And I think it's important that we learn these skills. And my colleague agreed entirely. And then they went to the education director, and he said, no, it's too expensive to teach this. So they ended up going to external partners. And this was all the hype at the moment around big data. So everyone was feeling pressured that they needed to do something with it. And they said, Mirko went to them and said, well, if you want us to do something, we can teach our students in 10 weeks the basics. And then the 10 weeks afterwards, they can actually do some exploratory research for you. So that kind of became the long-standing deal we had, that they were paying for our students to learn how to do these basic data analysis skills, data collection and analysis skills. But this also kind of sparked our own internal quest into, okay, what are we actually doing when, as humanities scholars, in using these tools? And I think this kind of sparked our own need for tool criticism and thinking about the decision making in how we construct our own research. Yeah, so that's what I wanted to share with you today as a beginning. Let me see if I can stop this. You can obviously see I'm a Teams person. There you go. Got it.
Thank you so much, Karen. And now in this second, well, thank you all panelists for these initial remarks. Hopefully, we found many intersections, many questions between our presentations and cross chances of cross pollination within the approaches that we've experienced and you guys generously shared with us. So now what I would suggest is, if the panelists would like to react or ask questions to other panelists, and in the meantime, everyone is welcome to type your questions in the chat box, and then we're going to address that. So I would open to the panelists for making questions and comments and reactions now. Feel free just to unmute and speak up.
So maybe I can just start with a comment and a theme that I thought kind of recurred throughout all the talks, and that I find is quite interesting to me, and where I think, you know, that is important, and where, you know, the energy should be focused. And there's been this recurring theme of maybe the false or the unhelpful separation between method and critique, or method and truth, or the empirical and the hermeneutic. And it made me think back to when, you know, digital humanities started gaining currency as a term, and some of the resistance to this new term was the worry that it was kind of imposing a focus on methodology, that it was kind of the computational humanities was becoming digital humanities, and it kind of obfuscated it kind of made a divide between digital humanities as analyzing humanities objects or phenomena with computational means, or you analyze digital culture through humanities means, and it kind of, you know, created this false tension. But I think all the talks are kind of addressing this question of, can you really, you know, separate it? This is a, you know, maybe a false dichotomy. And I find that all presentations kind of provide examples of different paradigms of combining these, you know, different ways of combining the computational and the humanities. And like Karine mentioned, there's all these different kinds of computational cultures that are starting to emerge. And I think that one of the roles of the humanities is kind of helping to broaden and multiply the access to digital culture and to computation, so that there'll be different kind of modes of application and different ways of accessing, you know, and making creative kind of paradigms at the intersection of the digital and humanities. So yeah, that was just kind of a thread going through the talks.
Yes, absolutely, Laura. This false dichotomy is something that recurs in the discussion about digital humanities. Yes, Alberto, please go ahead.
No, go ahead. Just I will add something later, please.
Okay. No, and when we planned this year, you know, the title of our project is Hermeneutics in Real Life. And we were discussing, should we add hermeneutics as the title of every suggestion for the speakers? And our hope was that we would make open questions, and it would lead us to hermeneutics. And I think that this false dichotomy leads us to hermeneutics, leads us to what Alberto mentioned, to explain more and understand better. And instead of seeing it as a dichotomy, you see as a productive dialectic in this hermeneutic spiral. So thank you very much for that, Laura. Alberto, please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I completely agree with what Laura just said. And I think over the time we discovered that in digital humanities, there was room for everyone. I mean, in the beginning, we were scared about, well, digital humanities, it means that digitalities or digital whatever computer sciences are invading or colonizing the humanities. And well, after a moment, we discovered that this was not the case. And I think the discussion we just had demonstrates precisely that. I mean, here we have people doing digital humanities with a little bit more of capacities in computation, those who are humanists and use humanities to criticize the digital societies or some elements of the digital societies. I think that's why I insisted on the fact that it's a collective enterprise. It's not just, you know, it's something new where, I mean, I would see something in the middle, like an object, digital culture, digital society, digital tools, and from the left and from the right and from below and from above, just a community of researchers interested into this, and everyone has her own world into this. So that's my point.
Great, thank you very much, Humberto. Other comments or reactions? Luca, if I may ask something, so did you have any experience already teaching or with further researcher in terms of this approach, trying to apply this unconscious approach to AI?
Well, teaching a proper course, you mean something? No, it's more research. Of course, I analyze concrete cases, such as the one I mentioned during my presentation, personal trauma and chatbots. Then I had experiences in analyzing algorithmic biases, for example, in AI systems for processing language, human language. And then I studied the relationship between designers and, for example, software design, algorithmic design, so this kind of things.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you, Luca. Other reactions? So we have a few questions here. Let me, Jay, do you want to ask your question?
Sure, and this is, I guess, a bit cautionary. I'm a lawyer and a law professor, and in legal theory right now, corpus linguistics is all the rage. And I don't fear colonization of one by the other, but it seems like law and corpus linguistics are mutually colonizing each other. The lawyers find now we have certainty in language. We don't have to deal with that hermeneutical messiness of practical reasoning. And the corpus linguists seem to be saying, now we've got a real world application where, you know, our science can really do good. And I think it's deeply misguided for hermeneutical reasons. I think they're very interesting features. But I wonder, is that just a little cul-de-sac where this may be going wrong, or are there other areas, and I consider law part of the humanities, are there other areas of the humanities where we find this kind of symbiotic attempt to escape from hermeneutics? What I mean by that is the law professors say the law just is what the ordinary meaning of the words were at the time they were uttered. That's the law, and that's an empirical fact that can be discovered scientifically. And of course, most corpus linguists say, well, that, you know, you're putting too much pressure on us. But anyway, I just opened this up as a venue in real life where I think this debate or problem has some real hold at the moment.
Oh, absolutely, Jay. That's a fascinating way of extrapolating the ideas from both sides, right? I'm not sure if the panelists want to react. James, did you want to chime in?
Well, my initial thought, it's interesting, right? Historicizing languages and discourse, right? It's incredibly risky. Of course, we have the same problem we have now, right? With getting access to language, right? Saying the language as it was used. Well, what are our sources, right? For that, whose discourse is being captured? There's kind of an assumption of then both the legal documents and the discourse that is being modeled existing in the same moment, right? Which obviously is a bit of an issue, right? With different technical languages, technical discourse circulating temporally at a different rate and different locations. Yeah, those questions come up in literary criticism, right? I think of a number of students of mine, and I see people doing other interesting work who want to get access to historical language through concepts, through concept modeling of the past, and that's risky and prone to all kinds of misunderstandings. Certainly the bias of language shifting towards the present is an issue there too. So lots of questions to be raised.
Yeah, absolutely, James. And I find it interesting that there's this tendency of find an easy solution, right? And now you have a model, so you don't need to go through the messiness of practical reasoning. On the other hand, oh, now I have an application of this method that was very nice in an abstraction fashion, but now I found a way to connected to reality, and I might not need to reflect upon the method itself. Yeah, I'm sure you are all familiar with Hermeneutica, the book by Geoffrey Rockwell and Stephen Sinclair. And one of the things that I found interesting, I used this book in one of my courses, and students tend to find that, oh, now we have the tool and we've got the answer, right? Then the problem is, no, the tool gives you more things to consider, to make your interpretations, to find other groundings. And there's another layer of problem now that you have to look at the tool itself, as we've discussed. So in a certain way, it complexifies the discussion, Jay. At least that's potentially one way of looking at that. Any other reactions? Any other thoughts on that?
Well, maybe I can just add the fact that thank you for the question, because whenever it comes to law, we start to think that hermeneutics is really about the real life. It's not about the Republic of the Lettres or whatever. It's about concrete effects on the concrete life of people. And exactly that's another interesting topic, because, well, we usually think of digital humanities as something experimental, and it's experimental because they are usually applied to an innocent field, a field that is not risky, that doesn't bring any harm, maybe. But in this case, in the case of law, we see the immediate risky application of digital humanities in the strict sense of the term digital humanities. I mean, automatic interpretation of text, literary text. So thank you for the question. I mean, it's an angle I didn't think about.
And I'll just quickly say, we are right now watching our Supreme Court in the United States disassemble a lot of law with this.
And sorry again, and I think it's really specific of a certain law system, such as the US law system, which is pretty different than the French one where I live, or the Italian one, which I'm familiar with, because they're based on not on cases. So they're not, well, they're dealing with a lot of text, but not the same amount of text you have in the US system. So it's a very specific topic.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out another area in which it's extremely dangerous, and some of us mentioned that, is in recruiting in human resources. So as we know, many intelligent quote systems are being used to find the perfect candidates, right? Trying to format that through automatic text analysis. And that's another area where many of us pointed out the issues and problems with that.
Well, currently in France, the automatic system are evaluating unemployment letters to the government, and also cover letters to enter the universities. So they're automatically analyzed. So it's that's about real hermeneutics in real life.
Oh yes, absolutely. We have another question here from Brad. Brad, do you want to ask your question for us, please?
Yeah, I was glad for the question coming from the field of law, because I'm more familiar with the field of medicine, I guess. And I referenced in my chat a book by Jeffrey Bishop called The Anticipatory Corpse, in which he criticizes medicine's reductio ad absurdum of reliance on data for its practice, because it objectifies the body. And I was struck by how often the word object came up in this process of hermeneutics and of humanities and digital stuff. I was also reminded about Gilbert Ryle's famous phrase about the ghost in the machine. And I was wondering whether, spiritually speaking, as we head toward a society and cultures that are more digitally based, whether we're not in our robotics literally making machines without ghosts. So I was intrigued by Luca's presentation on the unconscious and how that works out, because in everything he said, there was no libido. And an unconscious without libido is not only kind of non-Freudian, but it's also makes me wonder, where did the body go? Anyway, that's where my thinking was going.
Thank you very much, Brad. Reactions, comments? Luca, have you thought about adding libido to your unconscious approach?
No, yes, of course. I had just 5 or 10 minutes, so I had to cut any reference to the. No, of course, absolutely, I agree with his remarks. They're very interesting. Yes, of course, libido identification, projective identification, they're whole concepts connected to the unconscious dimension. And also the reference to the ghost in the machine. It's quite interesting. In the model I proposed, I was referring more to the so-called theory of material engagement, according to which cultural, the material culture is the condition of mind. Mind is based on the relationship with objects, on the material culture. But this is this is something else. Anyway, thank you for this.
Thank you very much, Luca. John, do you want to share your question with us?
Yeah, sure. So, and this was directed to Karen, but it could be to Laura and to anyone. So we have sort of solidarity, it seems to me, amongst us about the value of a hermeneutic approach or humanities approach to computation and whatnot. But there's sort of an absent partner then. So I guess I want to maybe ask from a hermeneutic perspective, you know, if we want to give as much. Well, actually, let me take it in the direction that I asked in the chat. And Karen, so you have your thesis is, you know, this sort of pleonasm of this idea. And I guess my question is, have you ever had doubts about that? In other words, in terms of the way in which Jay Moots's example, right, of the way in which the predominant discourse in the law is really not at all hermeneutic. Are we fighting a losing battle? So I guess that's the opposite. That's the pessimistic response to your optimism. So I guess, could you maybe address that?
Thanks for your question, John. I hope I'm understanding it correctly, because I see a lot of optimism, because I feel like we as humanities scholars have such a large role to play in our contemporary society in raising questions about how these systems work. And I see a lot of my colleagues doing precisely that, bringing their critical interpretive sensibilities to algorithmic systems, which we're offloading more and more decision-making to. And I do also notice in more of the public discourse, there is some backlash building up, right? People are becoming aware that there are a lot of problems, particularly, I think in the Netherlands, we had a very big scandal around child benefit welfare, which ended up being about discriminating against people who weren't Dutch. So they were flagged as more likely to be fraudulent, right? So it actually got our prime minister, well, not to step down, that will never happen with our prime minister, but at least publicly apologize and take responsibility for these kind of issues. So I think constantly, a young colleague of mine just got his PhD, which was on categories used by our Central Bureau for Statistics. And actually this open data is then being used for making by the government systems like the livability meter. And what he actually found out by critically with that infrastructure or that system was the use of also racist categories to identify which parts of cities would be deemed more or less livable. So I think precisely taking our critical sensibilities and interrogating these systems that are becoming more dominant is necessary. And we see a lot of, especially in welfare states also, there is this moment and this discussion about, do we need algorithmic audits perhaps, right? We cannot leave these systems to work on their own. There's a lot of call also for not just transparency, but also explainability of these systems. So I think there was this initial phase of hype and enthusiastic embrace, but I think precisely the critical sensibilities of the humanities, I think is helping to shift that needle and making us think, well, in certain parts of decision-making, we need humans, right? Certain things cannot be done and delegated to systems alone. There needs to be, some form of accountability in the form of, humans. So I see precisely this as an opportunity for the humanities.
Thank you very much, Karen. This is very nice to hear that. It seems that in a certain way, historically, the digital came to rescue the humanities and figure out that they needed more the humanities, right? Laura, did you want to add anything in particular to this?
Yeah, I mean, I think, these are really important questions, and it kind of, you wonder why is, are the humanities under threat? Why is there, this sense of threat and crisis when obviously, we're able to demonstrate, the value of this approach, and also when students demonstrate that they want, they want this more holistic, combined, approach that the humanities offers, and the question that Jay raised in relation to law, that definitely happened in literary studies. The kind of computational analysis would be the end of interpretation, and then people realize, well, actually, it can be a way of kind of externalizing interpretation. And as Fernando mentioned and Karen mentioned it too, with that image, there's all these like layers of interpretation. But I think that's when the general kind of culture and political system that uses and deploys these methods wants to use them for efficiency, they don't want to invest in all these, layers of interpretation and in problematizing and which is the work which requires which often require work, and so is labor saving, in certain spheres, we just want to brush under the rug all these other aspects that, as humanities scholars, that's precisely what we focus on. So yeah, it's just a difficult thing to address,
Thank you very much, Laura. We are reaching the top of our time, but we have a final question from Tom. Tom, do you want to ask your question for us?
Well, very briefly, it really just follows up on what Karen and Laura were just saying, that there's no way, I think we would agree, to dodge the conflict of interpretations, whether it's a non-digital compared to an interpretation that takes digital into account, or whether it's a variety of digital approaches to the same question, that different algorithms come up with different data. So how is all of that to be interpreted? Only to say what I think has already been said, that we need the human hermeneutic process to engage in the dialogue of different interpretations. So further comments, or just leave it there?
Any final reaction to Tom's
Yeah,
suggestion?
can I just answer to Tom, and especially to what he wrote, the question he wrote. I mean, the problem is that the hermeneutics of suspicion takes time. I mean, and we don't have time. I mean, there is a real problem there. For instance, when you speak about the possibility to explain an algorithm, which is technically feasible, but it takes time, a lot of time, to be understood, to be criticized. So, for instance, you can apply against the decision of an algorithm that decide that you will not have your application accepted in a certain university in France. You can apply it against it, but it takes time, it takes money, because you have to hire a lawyer, you have to, I mean, and that's the problem. I mean, the digital hermeneutics is pretty quick, but the human hermeneutics of suspicion takes time. So I would say that sometimes this battle is quite unfair.
Thank you very much, Alberto, and thanks, Don, for the question. So one thing, we have other questions here. So I'm saving the chat log, and I'm going to forward it to the panelists so they can reply and we can continue the conversation offline. But I really wanted to thank so much Karen, Alberto, Luca, James, and Laura for being with us this afternoon. We really appreciated it. I hope that you realize how much it took us closer to hermeneutics in real life. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening, day for all of you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Thank you so
having us.
much.
Bye.